Hey out there, everyone. My name is CV, and welcome to my channel, The Reconverted Catholic. As always, thanks for stopping by and checking out my videos here on this channel. I definitely appreciate the support. So it's that time of the week again for our gospel reflection for today, Sunday, May 2nd, 2021. For those of you who have not watched my prior gospel reflection videos, or to those of you who have, both, so what I do is I start with reading a gospel passage for this week or for this Sunday. Then I go into reflection, which is a combination of the Lectio Divina method and then also me giving some additional insight on interpreting the scripture. This gospel this week, well, I have so many favorite stories and passages from scripture, but I love this one, and this one is John chapter 15 verses 1 through 8, and Christ referring to himself as the vine and explaining in a parable and what that means. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. I'll read the gospel passage for this week, and then again I'll go into the reflection, and hope you enjoy. Thanks. So, gospel reading, starting again, John chapter 15, verses 1 through 8, starting with verse 1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and every one that does he prunes so that it bears more fruit. You are already pruned because of the word that I spoke to you. Remain in me as I remain in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me, and I in him, will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. People will gather them and throw them into a fire, and they will be burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want, and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. So that concludes the reading. Now let's go into the reflection. Okay, so over the past weeks, I've been thinking a lot about the statistics that only 1/3 of Catholics believe in the real presence in the Eucharist. Putting aside that clearly some Catholics have fallen victim to the current Western culture of ever malleable subjective truth, I'm also thinking about a point that Father who said Mass at the church I attend made during the homily this weekend about the scripture readings. Namely, to understand how some individuals end up as bad people, whether that be bad people in their professions or with family and peers, or who live a life of crime and danger, we must ask, what in their background or upbringing that influenced them into a life of being abusive to others. So Father's primary point was that professions, relationships, or any means of human interaction, for that matter, will not necessarily change someone who is morally bankrupt. That means there are good priests and some bad priests, good police officers and bad ones, good doctors and bad ones, and so on. That could really spin into a bigger conversation about the expectations we set for each other and what it will take for us to be of strong moral character. However, that is an entire reflection alone and for another time. In the meantime, what we do know, and which unfortunately is often an empty self-help platitude, is that we as humans must get our own lives in order first, before we attempt to help other people change their lives. Jordan Peterson, who is now one of the most famous clinical psychologists and intellectuals of our time, gives similar advice in his popular book called 12 Rules for Life. And quote from that, clean up your room before going out and helping others clean their rooms. We also hear this advice as you must be happy with yourself before being happy with others, though this version is a bit problematic, which is also for a separate reflection for another time. Nevertheless, no matter how much we appear to build good morals, no matter how intellectually impressive we become, no matter how much we have duped ourselves into thinking we have our rooms in order, we also know that appearances can be quite deceiving, meaning that bad people do not always change because of their circumstances, even in environments or professions that serve people for a greater good. Hence, one of the core reasons that Jesus tells of the parable of him as the vine, that we are the branches, and that we must be consistent in our relationship with Christ in accepting his grace and living firmly by the gospel. As a vine is responsible for supporting and nourishing the branches must willingly accept the vine so that the branches can be pruned properly and continue to grow in communion with the vine. Another way to explain this rich, vivid allegory, if we do not take any part of the gospel message seriously, if we do not sincerely participate in all of the sacraments that God has instructed us to receive, if we constantly weaken our spiritual branch to Christ, our vine of salvation, then as Christ says in John chapter 15, and well in verse 6, John chapter 15, quote, anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither, end quote. And that is, and as heavy as this may sound, essentially committing spiritual suicide. And when that happens, it usually leads to a life of, quote, whatever makes me happy, which in turn usually leads to other people becoming corrupt and fueling the fire of materialism and nihilism. Which leads me back to the Eucharist. If we do not 100% believe that the Eucharist is the real presence of Christ, and which is the all-encompassing reason we celebrate Mass, then how can we possibly take any other part of our Catholic life seriously? How can we as individuals remain a healthy, solid branch for the vine if we are constantly bending, twisting, and manipulating it for our own personal gain? Doesn't that fit in right with why we have original sin in the first place? That when we put ourselves in our own subjective truth before God's objective truth, we keep reliving original sin over and over again. So this week, I pray for all of those who have fallen away from believing in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. I pray that we Catholics band together and refocus on the Catechism. After all, the Church has been quite clear on the Eucharist since Christ first instructed us to partake in it in his memory. If we don't believe Christ's instructions, then what can we believe? So I'll continue to reflect on this. I'm actually thinking about writing a blog article, making a separate video entirely on the Eucharist, and hopefully further drive the point home that it is not at all an optional truth. And as kind of an amusing sidebar to end this reflection, even during my time as an atheist, I used to tell people exploring spirituality that if they were going to investigate any faith, it should be the Catholic faith. Specifically, the whole premise of the Mass is to have a powerfully transcendental experience with God, and that every Mass includes a supernatural event, that being transubstantiation, when the bread and the wine is then transformed into the body and blood of Christ, the real presence of Christ. Therefore, for the genuine seekers who want a deeply meaningful relationship with God, what more powerful way than to be in a miraculous, supernatural communion with God through the Eucharist? Moreover, what more powerful way to honor and fully embrace Christ's excruciating sacrifice and then glorious resurrection for us? Keeping that in mind, it is more than time to put the Eucharist at the forefront of our Catholic faith journey. So I appreciate you watching this video. Please feel free to leave comments. You're also welcome to email me at trcatholic@gmail.com. Again, that's trcatholic@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you and get to know you, hopefully a little better in the process. So enjoy your week ahead, and we'll see you at the next video. Thanks.